Hey folks, in today's video I'm going to be telling the story of a house through time. The house is called Windy Ridge, that existed just along the road from here from about the mid-1920s to the 1960s. In terms of where we are, well, we're right on the outskirts of London. We're on the Croydon-Surrey border, but it really has quite a bit of history. So just ahead of me, so behind camera and up to the left, was Addington Lodge that existed for a few centuries. And that was the main building that served the area. Lodge, farm, all sorts of land that was being worked. And the site today still has a use, because it's basically where the Fisher's Farm Refuse and Recycling Centre is. So whenever you go up there to recycle any goods that you no longer need, you'll be actually making a connection with history. So that was Addington Lodge, and really there wasn't much else for quite some time until the building started just a bit further down from here. Without further ado, let's get on our way and let's tell the story. My story of the house will not just be of the house, it will be about the people and some of their stories that form part of the overall history of Windy Ridge. And the whole thing came about because a lady got in touch with me called Alison, and she had some stories of her mother who visited the house during the Second World War. And it created some memories for her as a child. They've been passed on. So I'm going to tell the best story I can of Windy Ridge and the surrounding area. And this is the Pioneer Place plot. It's been a religious centre for quite some time now, but many may know it originally as St Giles School, which was set up here in March 1933. Now, there were some initial challenges in the 30s because there was closures through various illnesses. There was a typhoid outbreak that was linked to the pumping station next door, and after that it became an open air school. And they made some more developments over the years. They added a pool there in 1961, and it was closed in 1977, and it was moved to Pampisford Road in Croydon. I don't think there's actually been a huge difference to the layout of the properties on the land over those years. Not a great deal of change in the maps from then up until the current date. Now, this is Addington Court Golf Club, which is sort of opposite both the St Giles School site and the pumping station. And research tells me that it was opened in 1932. However, when I looked on maps that were earlier than that, it showed the clubhouse. So further research showed that there was a club opened here in 1909. There were various exhibition matches, and that justifies why it was on the map before 1932. It appears that the 1932 reference is that it was the first purpose-built public golf course in England. So it was a privately run public golf course. So that is Addington Court's claim to fame. Many people visit here. It's, again, looking at the location, just on the outskirts of London. You're connecting with the country and you can have a good old game of golf. So a very popular course. Just through the fence, we've got the site of the current pumping station. That's Addington Well Pumping Station, and the mound just in front is from the original pumping station building. And what a wonderful building it was. We have waterworks cottages all the way down here. Some of these buildings came after others. I believe that the far one and the one here, the entrance, were earlier, and then the other ones were kind of added in a bit later. And directly opposite me is the site of where Windy Ridge would have stood. So this is kind of narrow point here in Featherbed Lane. I've got some map references here that will help to tell the story, and also I found one aerial image which gives you a very good idea of the plots that Windy Ridge stood in context with where we just visited the location of the pumping station and the school, etc. So I'm looking at a fence now, but behind the fence would have stood the plot of the property called Windy Ridge. So I'm just going to cross over here. I'm pretty certain that the Courtwood Lane development, and in particular the area that took over the Windy Ridge plot, was the first to be built. There's a bit of a letter missing there, but quite clearly that is the Forestdale sign. And we have the maps. These maps exist throughout the estate. So broadly, there's a kind of L shape of properties here. So starting at the end here, up into the corner, and then panning round. And just to pop the map on again, really just in that corner plot, generally, is where Windy Ridge would have stood, at the top of the hill. And I wonder if that's where it got the name from, because they probably felt the wind, particularly if there weren't too many properties to slow down that route of the wind, as it were. So that was the location of Windy Ridge. And this area is known as the Green. And those are the houses in Featherbed Lane that go back to about the 1930s, broadly. So how did development on this land come about? Well, it goes back to the 1920s. So after World War I, and in line with something that other philanthropists had done in the past, such as Rowntree and Cadbury, the idea was to build a sort of community, a development, and say thanks to the servicemen that fought in the war, and just to give them a helping hand. In 1920, Surrey Garden Village Trust was formed with the idea of providing the land in the area for servicemen to basically start their own kind of enterprise, really. The land would be provided on favourable terms. They would have to make a down payment. They would have to do the building work themselves. And the terms would last for a period of time, after which they would eventually become freeholders of the plot. And the sizes were from sort of half an acre upwards. In 1923, Wickham Noakes died. Now, Wickham Noakes was the owner of Selsdon Park Hotel. And land from Farley Road in Selsdon all the way down to here at Featherbed Lane became available. So the council acquired that land and put the whole plan into operation. And it was all divided up. People came in and basically got up and running. So that was the start of the smallholdings in this whole area. The land itself was quite difficult to work. There's a lot of flint in these areas, and people kept chickens, rabbits, that kind of thing, and still hopefully turn some kind of profit, or at least try and break even. But the idea was great, and it stood the test of time because the smallholdings were here from the 1920s. Things changed a bit later on, and towards the end of the video I'll kind of play out how that happened. But that was basically the story of how we went from initially farms, fields and woods in this area to Forestdale that we see today. Now, in 1926, Alfred and his sister Ellen Ouzman lived at 183 Norwood Road, Herne Hill. In 1927, there was an entry on the electoral roll for Featherbed Lane with their names saying land at Windy Ridge. Also in that year, Alfred Ouzman retired from the post office through ill health. And I think putting all that together, it was an opportunity to escape from the town out into the relative countryside of Addington. There would have been a few houses dotted around by that time from the introduction of the smallholdings by Surrey Garden Village Trust. And they settled in the area. I also found a reference in the London Gazette where Alfred Ouzman had received an Imperial Service Medal for services to the post office. It was often something that was awarded after service being given to the post office and perhaps other industries as well. I don't know the full detail. In 1929 electoral roll, Alfred and Ellen are also referenced alongside Charlotte Emily Ouzman. Charlotte's another sister of the family, and Alan Collins Ouzman. Alan was born in 1900 and he was the child of Charlotte Emily Ouzman. Also in 1929, Ellen Ouzman passed away aged 61. In 1930, according to the electoral roll, we got Alfred and Charlotte living in the house with Alan Ouzman. In 1931, they are joined by Jack Scott. Jack was here for 1931 and 1932 electoral roll returns. I don't know any real detail on Jack Scott, other than the fact that there was a Jack Scott located at Addington Lodge, which I mentioned earlier. Also in 1931, there was a very interesting newspaper headline, and it was about approval for a sunbathing club in Courtwood Lane, and I'm kind of using that sunbathing term in air quotes. And I'll read you something from the newspaper. So it said, the Croydon Borough Council have approved a site for premises of the Sunbathing Society in a secluded spot at Courtwood Lane, Addington. According to Mr. N.F. Barford, Honorary Secretary of the Society, this is the first inland English borough to approve of a sunbathing establishment. The approval is for 1 year. Think about quotes, because I believe that there were undergarments involved, but probably not too many. So the Sunbathing Club was approved. So in 1933, Alan Collins Ouzman was married to Annie Jane Caroline Bellis, and he moved away. So in 1934, we just got Alfred and sister Charlotte living in the property. And also in 1939 register, which was the best sort of census type report that we had for the time, it had, again, the brother and sister living here, and Alan and Annie were living then at 94 Valley Road, Kenley. So I'm making an assumption that throughout the war years, the occupants of Windy Ridge were Alfred Ouzman and Charlotte Ouzman, brother and sister. Just heading up here to get to Yew Tree Way, which became a track. There were stories of it being quite a challenge to ride over the largely flint area. So we got the start of Yew Tree Way down there, Featherbed Lane, and that goes all the way up to Selsdon Wood. There are no photos of Windy Ridge that we could locate. I mean, there may be, and if you know of any, please let me know. Please send them on. But Alison said that her mum remembers the property being very large, with the small windows, the type that you'd see on a cottage. And there were some very large gardens with the gate that led onto the road, which we saw the kind of positioning of that based on the fence that we saw earlier at Featherbed Lane. So Alison's mum and her friend Norma used to play at the waterworks occasionally, the pumping station on Featherbed Lane. We think that Norma's dad may have been an employee there, so perhaps he had a degree of access, and as long as the girls behaved, everything was fine. But I think there might have been some scary experiences for a young child with all the pipes and engineering and various other activities going on there. Now, we may not always appreciate just how we go up and down so many hills in this particular area. Forestdale, I suppose a hill can assume a dale, can't it? And I'm going to walk past the school up here, the Forestdale Primary School. And for two reasons really. One, because it does give you a good idea of the landscape where it's not been developed upon. And also because it's yet another footpath that existed quite some time back. And we still have the benefit of it today. So this is footpath 529 that takes us to Selsdon Park Road. I mean, I did say that about the landscape. I think you can still get an idea even though the school has been developed upon, certainly in the time since my kids came. So I'll lift it up. There we have distant view of school and the pathway here. We're on it now, and here it is on the map. So many footpaths have a lot of history to them. So we went from a slight climb up from Featherbed Lane, and now we're coming right down into the valley. And then back up again a little bit onto Selsdon Park Road. We have the school playing field, but I'm not sure they would have needed to do much to that when it was being developed. Level it and plant it with grass. So we've got to the war years in our story, but there's a couple of other things that I want to pick out further down. I'm just going to go up to the Selsdon Park Road itself. This has existed as quite a main route for a while. The property's probably pre-Second World War semis. They've got the school building up there, or college, John Ruskin College. And actually, whilst when we pan around now, we just see lots of development and hear lots of traffic noise. Well, it would have been so different from there. We would have seen the landscape sort of fall away and up to the road where we took this path, and then down again the other side towards Courtwood Lane. And yeah, these old photos don't particularly make it out, but this is another view. I'll just show you another view from this kind of area, just along from the SO garage, about how it would have looked. On the 1st of January 1936, the foundation stone was laid for the farmhouse cafe to be built here. And this was the Addington Smallholdings depot. So the building was designed by Malcolm Sharp on the site of the depot and contained a shop with a cafe, snack bar and a flat on the first floor for the manager, and a small hall at the rear of the property for social gatherings. So looking at the footprint of that building, we can indicate roughly the size of Windy Ridge. Now I know we've had some extensions on the side here and that kind of thing, but just using what I could find from an old map and then kind of overlaying it on the plot that we see today, Planet Spice, can help to visualise the size of Windy Ridge. Windows and everything are very different, maybe they would have been similar, but I got the impression that so many of the properties here, the design signature was, well, it wasn't consistent, shall we say. So today, Planet Spice restaurant, and known by many different names over the years, and they're having some work done at the moment, but we can make a reference from the size of this plot today to the size of Windy Ridge back in the day. So in terms of the family stories, well, in 1946, Charlotte Ouzman died aged 85, and from 1947, Alfred is living with Alan and Annie at Windy Ridge. There was a newspaper headline in 1949 where Alan Ouzman was out riding with his wife in Harrow Road, Wallingham, on a push bike to which he'd attached a small motor. And he was stopped by the police and asked to produce his licence. And it was a provisional licence, and he didn't have a so-called qualified driver with him, and was fined 10 shillings for the privilege. Oh dear, probably would have been dismissed as hijinks nowadays. Although we've got electric bikes everywhere, haven't we? So that's less of an issue. In January 1953, Alfred Ouzman, the original occupant from 1927, passed away at Croydon General Hospital. And 1953 was the last year of the Ouzman connection to Windy Ridge, because in 1954 a new family arrived, the Avises. So the first occupants on the electoral roll were Leslie Avis, Marjorie Avis and James Avis. And he actually had a previous connection. He used to live at number 21 Featherbed Lane in 1939. In fact, Marjorie Avis is listed as sole occupant of 5A Crossways Parade in 1945. We have people that have never gone far when they've moved houses. Featherbed Lane, Crossways, moving up to Windy Ridge. 1955, Leslie and Marjorie Avis. In 1959, Leslie, Marjorie and Brian Orbell, aged 24. Now, I couldn't find much about Brian Orbell other than the fact that apparently there was a very good cricketer called Brian Orbell, and he was referenced in various sports pages at the time, and a pupil of Archbishop Tennyson School. So, and again, if anyone knows, I'd love to hear from you. In 1962, Leslie and Marjorie Avis are joined by Rose Houseman. And Rose was Marjorie Avis's mother, and she previously lived at Hazelwood, which was another large house in the Smallholdings area between Yew Tree Way and Courtwood Lane. So again, another close connection, and moving not far up to Windy Ridge. So in 1963, Marjorie Avis died aged 50, and Alan Ouzman received the Imperial Service Medal. So I'm assuming at that point he retired from the post office, and that's exactly what would have happened to his uncle when he retired and moved here in 1927. 1963, we've got Leslie Avis, Jennifer Avis, Rose Houseman and Christopher Avis. 1965, Leslie Avis and Joan Kent and Christopher Avis. Joan married Leslie Avis Q4 1964, and 1966 is the last time that Windy Ridge is referenced on the electoral roll, with occupants Leslie Avis, Joan Kent and Christopher Avis. So that really is when we start to see the Forestdale development kicking in. 1966 to 67. I think that at that point there would have been a huge amount of land clearance activity in this area, flattening Windy Ridge and other properties to make way for the Featherbed Lane development that we see right in front of us today in 2025, and already for a number of decades. And there were two houses that remained in this area for the best part of 20 years after Windy Ridge was demolished and the Featherbed Lane development was built. And those houses were Ebencote and Hares Bank. Interestingly, it was called Hares Bank, whereas this whole road was really known as Hares Bank for a while. And I was flicking through the electoral roll pages thinking, well, sooner or later I'm going to see that the properties will no longer be listed. But yes, it was a full 20 years, because in the mid-80s, Silverwood Close, which we see just coming up here on the right-hand side, was developed. So I guess it took a year or two to build the houses, of course. So Silverwood Close was the last of the developments that took place in this area between Windy Ridge there, two large houses, and then the golf clubhouse, and down there where we started the walk. So essentially there we have it, a house that was here for 40 years. Prior to that we've seen just farmland. Then we've seen the building of the Addington Well. That's got its own history. We've seen the school that's had some history and has still got some activity there today. And then of course the Smallholdings, which were an absolutely fantastic concept to allow servicemen from World War I to set up and run their own small holding and hopefully make some money. And they weren't really commercially successful. There were a lot of poultry farms and piggeries and the like, but they didn't make a lot of money. But because of the terms, ultimately the freehold would pass to the plot owner. And then when, I guess, Waits came along saying we want to buy up properties to develop Forestdale, maybe it was a temptation, shall we say, to do a good commercial deal. It did go to the High Court. It wasn't plain sailing for Waits to get the go-ahead and do the building over at Forestdale. There were challenges, but 15 to 1700 properties later, and a few decades, we have what we have today. And it's still a bit of a battle to stop the spread, of course, of development. But we have a housing challenge, so we have to work out how best to do such things, how to keep the plate spinning and tick the boxes and other metaphors that I'm mixing. So, thank you very much for coming along with me on this history of Windy Ridge, mid-20s to mid-60s, and some stories about the people that live there. So I wanted to try and tell it in that way, give you a bit of depth, but it's really about how this has gone from fields to Forestdale, to be honest. And thanks very much for watching. Look after yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.